Welcome to Motivated to Lead podcast, helping you become a better leader. I'm your host, Mark Klingstein. Hi, everyone. Thanks again for joining us for our podcast this week. My name is Mark Klingstein with SEMA Partners. Each week, we interview leaders and they share lessons learned from their careers. Our goal is to help you become a better leader. This week, we're happy to have with us Laura Chambers. She is the CEO of a Bay Area company called Willow. She has held leadership positions with companies such as Airbnb, eBay, PayPal, and Skype. She originally is from Australia and has an MBA from Stanford University. We're looking forward to the thoughts she's going to share with us. Let's join our conversation with Laura. I guess first off, can you give us just a little bit of your story, a little bit of your background?
Absolutely. So first of all, thanks so much for having me. I think, talking about leadership and learning about it is so important. And I'm a big fan and student of leadership. So it's so fun to be here today. Quick update or background. I grew up in Australia in a small country town. And so by the time I got through university, I'd realized I wanted to be in business, but I also realized that I had no idea what that really meant, right? I really didn't have any exposure to companies or corporations. So for the first 4 or 5 years of my career, I really focused on learning. So I joined McKinsey and did management consulting for a few years, and that was brilliant. Great grounding in the tools to do business well, but also great exposure to a lot of different industries. I did that in Australia. And then after that, I did my MBA. I moved to the States, to Stanford. And again, that was really good for me to get even more exposure to different types of industries and different types of worlds. So that was really what I wanted to do at the start, to sort of figure out what this whole business world meant. After business school, I realized that I wanted to get into more of an operational role, but I was also conscious that I had a bit of a strategic background. So I looked for a business in Silicon Valley that had a good track record of bringing in people with a strategic background, but then putting them into operational roles. And at the time, the clear winner was eBay. So I joined eBay in 2005, and I actually ended up staying there for over 13 years. I worked right across eBay in all the portfolio companies. I was at eBay, PayPal, Skype, and at corporate. And in all the functions, I started in strategy, but pretty quickly moved to product and operations. I spent some time in HR and marketing, right across the board. And it was a great experience. I felt very lucky that I could do a little bit of a rotation program and get to experience all those different areas. And my roles got bigger and bigger. I had a stint for a couple of years as the chief of staff for the CEO, John Donahoe, which was also an incredible experience. And so that was brilliant. So I did that for about 13 years. And then I moved to Airbnb for 2 years. At Airbnb, I ran Core Host, which is about 3/4 of the business. And again, that was great. A really different culture, a really different company, exciting business. Really fantastic to be in a place that's very design oriented and very creative. I really enjoyed that. And then just this June, I left Airbnb and joined Willow, and I'm the CEO of Willow. Willow, for those of you who don't know it, brought out this incredible product a couple of years ago, which is the first all-in-one wearable breast pump. Before that, mums had to be tethered to the wall. I know that. I have 3 kids. And so I spent a lot of time pumping with the old-fashioned pumps. And so I'd always been a fan of Willow from when it came out. I thought it was just so great that we were innovating for women. And so when the opportunity came up, I jumped at it. And I've been at Willow for the past 4 or 5 months.
Great. Well, that's quite a story. You've got an interesting background mix of companies that you've worked with, and so we're definitely looking forward to getting some of your insights of things that you've learned over your career. I always ask this question, or ask it of most guests: if you were to spin back time and knowing what you know now, and go back and talk to a 22-year-old Laura, what advice would you give her?
Oh gosh, 22. I think there's so much advice I would probably give her, but I'd say the lesson that I learnt the hardest, right, that I wish I could have skipped a few cycles on, is probably around managing energy and managing burnout. At 22, if I think back, I was just, everything was a hero project. I was constantly working all-nighters. I think that's about the age I got a stomach ulcer, right? Just from the amount of stress and the amount of work and hours. And, I was very, very unbalanced. But, in a culture and environment often where that was rewarded, right? Like everyone's like, you're doing such a great job, like keep at it, you're working so hard. And so you don't have a lot of voices typically that are helping you balance it. And you can kind of get away with it as an individual contributor to some extent, but it starts to break down when you start to lead. And I think that was a big surprise for me, right? When I transitioned to leadership and managing bigger teams, I kept trying to be the hero, but that doesn't work, right? Like you actually need your team to be the heroes, and you also need the energy to give them, right? And you don't have energy if you're burning the candles at both ends. So the two sort of snippets that I've just internalized and I share with people on my teams all the time. The first is this: if you have a fun job at a fun company, the one truth will be that there's too much work to do. There just will be. And if you try to do it all, you will burn out. I've tried this many, many times, and I have successfully proven every single time that you burn out. Right? Like I just did that over and over and over again. And so what's important to know is that it is actually impossible to get all the work done. And so instead of trying to do it, which might be your first instinct, what you really need to do is prioritize. And not just prioritize, but communicate that prioritization so that everyone's in the same sync. And so I promise all of my teams now that I will give them too much work to do, but I make them promise back that they will let me know what's possible. So that's sort of one truth that I've learned and, try to really stick to. The second is sort of more of that leadership perspective, and the phrase that I heard once, and it came to me right at the right moment when I was just not getting this balance right, is a very simple phrase. You can't pour from an empty cup. And I focused a lot on pouring. Like I really thought about my job as what can I give? How can I support? How can I help? I never thought about the cup. And as soon as I realized that, it was just a light bulb went off. And that's when I started on my own journey of trying to understand my own energy levels and try to understand what gives me energy, what takes it away, when I have the most energy or the least energy, how I can build it up if I'm feeling pretty depleted. And that, I'm still learning on that. I think about it all the time, and I've tried lots of different techniques on it, but I'm getting better and better, and I'm sort of realizing what that takes so that I can, it's exhausting. I'm homeschooling. I've got 3 kids. I'm a CEO. There's a lot going on, but I'm always conscious about my cup because I know I need to fill it as much as I can so that I can continue to support those people around me.
One of the things that I've heard a lot from executives, from leaders during this last 8 months is just trying to keep that energy level up, and not just for you, but also for your team. What have you learned during this time as far as keeping people engaged and energized and focused as far as on kind of what you're trying to do?
Yeah, well, don't forget I joined in the middle of a pandemic, right? So my whole interview process was remote.
Sure.
I haven't met really anyone in the team in person. And so I had to learn the business and get to know the team remotely. And so I really focused on a couple of things. One was communication. So I send a weekly email every week, and it's not just, here's the business results, but I talk about what I've been up to, what I'm reading or listening to. And I encourage people to share me their ideas and what I've learned. And then I share some quotes from our customers. So I do that every single week, just so that people feel connected on multiple dimensions. And then we have a weekly huddle as well. And so where we get together and we do little breakouts so people can pair up and just chat about topics and check in with each other. And so that's been really nice in terms of communication and connection. And then secondly, over 3/4 of our team are parents. And those that aren't parents, many of them are living alone. So everyone is struggling with isolation in the pandemic in different ways. And so we have done a series of surveys and conversations with the team about how they're doing and what they need. And we've actually created a project which we call Project Thrive, because we don't just want to survive, we want to thrive. And it's pretty multidimensional. There's things from setting a culture where it's okay to block time to take care of what you need to take care of. And that might be going for a walk or transitioning a child through school, but we all block that time and we tell each other about it and we support each other through it. We've also introduced a lot of wellness activities. So everything from sort of therapy support circles to yoga to exercise classes. There is sort of every week the team has 3 or 4 options of things that they can engage in. They can sort of pick and choose what works for them. But we've taken it really seriously. It's something that I care a lot about. It's something I'm personally struggling with and working with all the time. And I know my team is too. So we've really been working hard on creating a very supportive environment through this crazy time.
I heard you give a talk. It's been a little while ago that you did a talk, and it was entitled "Career Jungle Gym."
Yeah.
And I thought it was an interesting concept. You talked about kind of taking half steps in your career, and I don't think I've ever heard anybody talk about it in that way. Can you expand a little bit on that and just kind of in your career and some lessons that you learned around that?
Yeah, so I would say from pretty early on in my career, I decided that I wanted to be a CEO. Now, I was quite clear that I may choose not to do that, and that may not exactly be the path that I picked it, because I liked the intentionality behind it. It did a couple of things. One, it gave me personal accountability, so I would sort of take the tougher, harder, scarier job on balance. But also it meant that when I got a new job and a new boss, I would tell them what my intention is, and they just took me a little bit more seriously, right? They're like, oh gosh, okay, wow,
Sure.
That's surprising. So you need some coaching and development, and you've got big ambitions. So that was sort of the helpful first step. And then the second thing that I decided pretty early on was that I didn't just want to get there quickly. I wanted to get there well. And so what that meant for me was there were several opportunities along the way where I could have got quick promotions sort of up in one function, but I very deliberately decided to not do that. I took a lot of half steps, and sometimes they felt like side steps, and quite often they felt like backward steps along the way.
Sure.
But I did that for the diversity of learning. And so I have very deliberately done that throughout my career. That's why I've worked in all those different functions in many different businesses, because I wanted to make sure that when I made it to CEO, I was as well-rounded as possible. And then when I give advice to people about half steps, there's that element of it. But there's also the element that when you say you want to make a career change, sometimes people want to leap immediately to that new place. So let's say you're an engineer and you want to become a marketing lead, right? That doesn't happen very often, but say that you did. What I would probably recommend you do is maybe move into product management or be a PMM, like a product marketing manager, for a while. Because that's like a half step to marketing where you can still use your skills that you're brilliant at, that are valued. And that might be 50, 60, 70% of the job, but you're learning in the rest of it. And so that idea of a half step, I think, sets you up for better success, right? As you make those transitions, you're learning what you need to learn, but you are really performing well as well and contributing a lot. And those, I think, are the magical little moves that you can make throughout your career that really set you up for success.
Yeah, it's great advice. So as you're thinking about in the times that you've stepped into a role where you've led a team, and maybe think back to that first team that you led, you were the individual contributor. Now you're leading a team. What do you wish you would have known going into that first leadership role?
So much. Yeah, particularly that first one's really tough, right? Because I think you have a pretty strong idea of how you would like to lead, because it's kind of how you wish all your managers had led you before. And but it's at least I was quite wrong. Like what I thought I should be doing was not actually right. And so I made quite a few mistakes, I would say, with that first team, and hopefully I've made less over time. But a couple of things stood out. One is I didn't reinforce great talent soon enough. So there was a couple of folks on that team who were amazing and brilliant, but under their previous leader had been kind of given a bit of an unfair performance review or been a bit sidelined or something like that. And they, what I wanted to do was get in the role for a few months and figure things out. What they wanted me to do was immediately to see and recognize them and do something about it. And so I think that sometimes you have to move faster than you're comfortable with. And I was probably a little gun shy at that. And I regret it because one or two of those people left, and I have never forgiven myself for it because I should have done more. The other thing that I've learned, and this may seem a little counterintuitive, is hire yourself first. Quite often you'll say, like for me, I was always been great at strategy and planning, right? And that's sort of a core strength of mine. So I didn't want to hire anyone to do that because I'm like, oh gosh, I'm good at that. I can just do that. But I wish I'd hired them first. And now quite often I do hire that role first because the reality is I'll spend too much time doing it, right? It's kind of my comfort zone. It's what I like to do. And I will do it, but probably I should be doing other stuff. And so by hiring someone to get into that role earlier, that actually has one of the greatest impacts probably on my capacity to lead the team more holistically. So I've learned that wasn't my first instinct. Again, I was sort of in that zone of I can do it all. But that's, bringing in those really great people that can do what you're great at early is actually quite a smart way of freeing up a disproportionate amount of capacity.
So how do you keep as far as personal development in the CEO role? I think it's important that even though you've achieved the title, that you continue to grow and develop. What are some things that you do as far as to continue, whether it's groups that you're part of or learning that you're constantly doing?
Yeah, so I always surround myself by people who are brilliant leaders that I can learn from. That's, whenever I've made that decision, I've never regretted it. And so at Willow, Josh Makawa, who I think has been on your program, is our founder and chairman, and he's brilliant, right? Like so smart and so great. I meet with him every week and I just ask him all the questions. And so just sort of like grabbing disproportionate time from amazing leaders around you is great. Similar, my board's fantastic and incredibly experienced, so I leverage their experience as much as I can. I've been a member of an organization called World 50 for a number of years. I'm transitioning into a bit more of an advisory role there, but I meet with those guys quite often, and they bring in great speakers and organize really interesting conversations. And so that keeps me really fresh, right? Just to hear very different perspectives and so forth. And then I just read a lot. As I mentioned earlier, I always write in my weekly emails what I've been reading or listening to. And then I ask my team to send me recommendations. And so I've got all sorts of crazy, fabulous recommendations from that. So I think, I love to learn, and every opportunity I have to just learn from interesting people and different perspectives that's actually quite energizing. I really enjoy it. And I think it helps you be a better CEO and a better leader, because otherwise you would get into a bit of a rut of one way of thinking about things. And I love seeing different perspectives.
Right. So what 3 books have influenced you, or what do you recommend to others?
I'd say the book that probably had the biggest influence on me when I was going on that transition from individual contributor to leader was a book called Multiplies by Liz Wiseman. It was kind of shocking to me, right? I actually thought I was a pretty good leader. And then I read the book and I realized I was making so many mistakes. There were all these things I was doing that I thought was supporting my team. But in fact, I was diminishing them, right? I was doing too much for them, or I wasn't giving them enough space. Or I was being too directive, and I was doing it with incredibly good intent, but the net result was that I wasn't giving them the space to achieve and shine and make mistakes and learn from them. And so that was a real wake-up call for me, I think, right at the right point of my career, and it's been very, very helpful. Another book that I read actually is a parenting book, but has turned out to be really helpful in my career as well, is a book called Now Say This. And what's cool about this book is that it really helps you help people when they're struggling. And so, a very simple use case might be with a toddler who, and this may or may not have happened in my household over the weekend, the 8-year-old sister steals the toy off the 2-year-old brother and he kicks her, right? And so, the way that you resolve with it, they've got this very simple 3-step approach: attune, limit, set, problem solve. So for a 2-year-old, you go up to him and you say, oh, little man, I can see you were so frustrated that your sister took the toy. That's the attune piece. And when you do that, you can just see the kind of stress melt away a little bit. Then you limit set. It's never okay to kick, right? And then you problem solve. And for a 2-year-old, that might be, okay, do you want to give her a hug or go give her a cookie or something, right? Like it's those sorts of things. And so, but this applies to grown-ups too, right? If there's a grown-up that's coming to you in high stress at work, it's quite often you want to go into problem solving with them, but the first step of attune is really important, and limit set, right? So someone may be ranting about a colleague and you might say, gosh, I can see you were so frustrated about this, and I get it. Like, I could see how you would feel that way, but it's probably not appropriate to call them out in a full meeting, right? That's not how we want to treat each other. So, and for a grown up, you wouldn't tell them what to do, but you'd be like, well, how are you going to fix it? Like, what are your ideas and how can I help you? And so that it's a parenting book, but those steps, the tune, limit, set, problem solve, work really well with grown-ups also. So I highly recommend that one. And then for a third book, this is a bit of a wacky one, but it's a book called The Goal. Do you know The Goal, Mark?
I don't think so.
Yeah, it's a bit of a classic. It's an operations book. It's a short read, and it's sort of written as a fable, I would say. And it's sort of a classic business school textbook. I think I read it when I was doing my MBA, but I read it again a year or two ago, and I will say the story doesn't date very well. So it's very 80s, and it's not very feminist, let me put it that way. I don't think the story is aged well, but the kind of truth underneath it is really fascinating, because it's a story of a guy who is trying to take over a plant and the plant's failing, and he tries to figure it out. But it really talks a lot about, what is the metric that you're trying to solve for, like the real one, and getting to that. And then what are your bottlenecks? And I find I mention this book because I think I ask myself that question a lot. And I think that book really prompted that as a leadership tool. Like, what are we really solving for here? And what is the bottleneck? Like, what is the one thing that's standing in our way? And so it's a quick read. I recommend it. Please don't judge me when you realize how not very female friendly it is. It's still worth it. Yeah, it's entertaining if you look at it through that lens. And it's quite instructive, I think. And even though it's about a factory, I found it very helpful even in software environments. So it's a worthy read.
Great. So tell me a little bit about growing up in Australia. Is there anything that you miss now that you've adapted to the US and the Bay Area?
They just got out of quarantine in Melbourne.
Yeah, right.
I'm so jealous about that. I think there's something about Australia. When I go back, it is incredibly relaxing. There's something about the pace of life. There's something about the realness of the interactions and the connection there that is really, really lovely, right? And I think it's a bit tricky. I think a lot of people that come to the US from Australia or other places, I'd say it's kind of easy to make friends, but it's hard to make deep connection. And that is something that I find a little bit easier when I go home. And so I try to bring the magic of that as much as I can, right? Like the kind of the empathy and the listening and the caring and the depth of those relationships is something that I miss, and when I go back, it's sort of instantly there and it's a little harder to replicate. And the coffee, amazing coffee.
Huh? Well, outside of work, what do you do to recharge? It sounds like you have a busy household. So what do you do to recharge for outside?
Well, I'm also an introvert. So
okay.
Endless Zoom meetings to endless children. I'm pretty exhausted most of the time. I think I've heard something somewhere that's like, I'm neither an early bird nor a night owl. I'm like a permanently exhausted pigeon. So I think that's kind of my reality. But as a result, I've actually had to become a student of energy because it doesn't come to me easily. And so I'm very, very conscious of it. And I'm always asking people for ideas and so forth. When I hit a real low point about a year ago, I did a lot of self-reflection and I put a plan in place, which I called 8-28, because I tried to make it really simple. And it was 8 hours of sleep every single night, at least 20 minutes of exercise every single day. And then the final 8 was 8 hours of eating a day. So I tried intermittent fasting. And so I did that for about 3 or 4 months, and my energy reserves were just so much better because it just led to a lot of, like, the foundations of energy were better. And then it led to a lot of things. I could just drink more water and I had less dairy because I had black coffee. Like, there was a lot of little subtle lifestyle changes that happened. And some of those habits have stuck, right? I still exercise every single day. And if I don't, I notice it. Like, I really, really notice what impact it makes. And Peloton has been my lifesaver through all of this. And I still sort of eat lighter in the mornings, so that seems to do a little bit better for me. But that has sort of been that sort of structure. And just focusing on the foundations, I think, helps tremendously. And then I realized when I'm tired, like over the weekend, it was just crazy busy. And I just went and quietly folded some laundry on my own for half an hour. And you know what? My energy came back. It was lovely. I know it's not glamorous, but little things like that, just a little bit of peace and quiet can go a really long way.
Great. Well, what parting advice would you give a leader?
Gosh, I would say, and we discussed this a little bit before, but really optimize around being around extraordinary leaders. I think when you're around extraordinary leaders, you will, and they can be your peers, they can be your boss, they could be the CEO, it doesn't really matter who it is. But if you do that, two great things will happen. One, you will learn, right? You will see great leadership in action, and you should be a student of it, and you will learn and absorb and get like an arsenal of tools and tricks to put into your quiver. But secondly, it will give you the space to be a great leader, right? You will be around other great leaders, and you won't have to be sort of dealing with politics and craziness. You'll have the space to really focus on doing great things. And I think that's, if you keep finding great leaders and being around them and working with them, that's an amazing foundation for success.
Great. Well, Laura, I sure appreciate your thoughts on leadership, and wish you success as you continue to lead Willow and all that you're doing, and look forward to seeing the company continue to expand and what you do in the future.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to the Motivated to Lead podcast. Please subscribe on iTunes. You can also see a video version of this interview at motivatedtolead.com. This podcast is brought to you by SEMA Partners, helping you find your next great leader.